Hey guys, this is Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about plants and projects, and today we are talking about a really big project that we undertook this spring to convert about 90% of our front lawn to gardens. Now I'm going to walk you guys through everything that we did to convert our turf grass to the big beautiful gardens that we have in there now, including, since there is a little bit of a slope, putting in a bit of a retaining wall to give us a bit deeper planting space, how to remove the turf grass in some areas and how to smother it in other areas, how I thought through paths and planting and access and all of that, and then we will wrap up the video with showing you guys what it looks like now after everything has been in the ground between 2 to 4 weeks depending on when I planted them, because this project did take a little bit longer than I thought it would. So let's jump into it with a look at the yard before we got started and the retaining wall.
So here is a look at basically where we started with this project. Obviously Mike has done some digging here to edge out where the gardens will be, but you can see on the other side we just have our spray paint line for where we are going to be putting the gardens in. And as of this video, what you're seeing here, all we have planted is a dogwood we put in last year, a hardy almond tree that we just put in, and a couple of random hyacinths. So this is a peek at what Mike is working on up here. Our neighbors have these gorgeous retaining walls in their front yard, and we decided that it would be a really great way to kill off a lot of this grass, because the goal is to kill grass and grow better things instead, and make it look really pretty too. So I'm going to be planting a lot of perennials up here so that it's not really something that we have a lot of maintenance for. It's just, you know, the once or twice a year pruning. And then we're going to do it on the other side too. So really all he's doing is digging out a trench and then tamping it down and then stacking these blocks, which we just got from Lowe's. They have a little ledge on the back of them, so we can just kind of build them up. And as he builds them up, he tamps down the dirt in the back here, make sure everything is level. And it's kind of been a little bit of learning as we go for this project, because this is the first time he's done it, and we use the smaller side as kind of a test run, and now he's doing what's kind of like the trickier and larger side, but it's looking really great, and I'm looking forward to having him turn this project over to me so I can start planting.
So let's talk about how you get from this blank slate to this finished side. So the very first thing I recommend doing is focusing on your paths. So you can see this is like the natural area where you'd walk into this garden from our driveway and sidewalk. So I planned a path there first. I also have herbs on either side, and then a hibiscus bush down there, all to pick from, and then the obelisk trellis has scarlet runner beans on it. So I want to make sure that I have access to everything, and just if I weren't picking, I'd want to be able to maintain things in the garden without stepping on and compacting all sorts of different parts of the soil. Now, when you add a designated path in, you are limiting that soil compaction to the areas that you're walking on. So I am planning a path right along here, because you'll see our sidewalk goes all the way up here, and then you either turn or you walk straight into the grass. So I am going to plan a paver path all the way down here to be able to access everything I have planted on this side, and then some things that I'm going to plant on the other side of the path. I'm also planning on running the path off into the middle of the garden bed like I did in the other one, just to be able to access this hazelnut bush here. This is an almond tree over here, and then a bunch of other things that I will be planting. So before you do any planting or anything like that, I do recommend you give some serious thought to where you're going to put any paths to ensure you have good access in your garden. Once you have an idea of where those paths are going to go, you can start working around that with some of your initial plantings. Now, I already have an almond tree in there and a hazelnut bush in there, so I'm kind of going to be working around those as well, but the paths will fit right in with where those are. Now, since this garden is going to be put in an area that has only had turf grass, as far as I know, and has not had anything planted in it other than the turf grass, I want to improve the soil before I start planting and mulching. So the approach I'm taking here is spreading a layer of this composted manure that we just had delivered from a local nursery. And I'm just gonna take over some wheelbarrows of this, and I'm gonna cover the whole turf grass area with a thin layer of it. But I'm going to focus right now on just the path area, since I would like to get that path in, get some landscaping fabric down, and get the pavers in so that I can have that to work around. It just really helps me if I actually have the path in. It helps me to visualize where I'm going to plant everything else and how everything is going to flow. And now we're just gonna dump it right onto the area where the path is gonna be. So if you wanted to add something to improve your soil to the whole area that you're working with instead of just the path area, that is totally fine. But like I said, it just really helps me visualize where I'm going to be planting things if I get the path laid first. Now, after I get enough stuff dumped here, the next thing I'm gonna do is just gently rake it out. This does not have to be perfect coverage. The goal is to just add a little bit more organic matter into this soil here and help improve it over time. Because the better quality your soil, the fewer weed issues you will have. I have so many more weed issues than my mom, who's been conditioning her soil for many, many years. And you just dig right into the ground and it is like a gorgeous, dark brown, easy to dig soil. Whereas ours is still that nice, heavy, rocky, clay-like soil. So this doesn't need to be perfect coverage here, because we are going to be covering this with landscaping fabric and not planting here. But it will still help benefit the soil overall if you add something like manure into it to help improve it over time. And after we have this spread out, I am going to lay down our landscaping fabric. Now, I do not typically use landscaping fabric for smothering out grass because it's not going to degrade over time like something like cardboard is. But if I'm laying a path, I will use landscaping fabric because I know I'm not going to be planting in that area. And I know it is going to do a better job of smothering out the weeds and grass than cardboard will. So it's worth it for the trade-off for me. And plus I still had enough left over in our shed to do all of the paths I need to do in this front garden area. So I'm just gonna lay this out roughly where I want the path to be, and then kind of just move it over a little bit so it's kind of bridging the gap between where the original bed ends and where the grass started. I'll just pop a little planter here to weigh it down on that side. And then I will use some scissors to cut it down to size over here. And now it's time to switch from our composted manure to mulch. I have this all laid out and I'm going to put a pretty thin layer of mulch over top of it and then put my stepping stones in place and then fill in the mulch around those. All right, checking in at the end of this workday here. I've got all of the mulch laid for the path that goes to the side of the yard and the pavers, and then I got one paver laid for the path that goes out here. I did lay the landscaping fabric and cardboard and some mulch, but I ran out of pavers, so I am pretty disgusting. It is time to clean up, and I will pick up this project again tomorrow to finish up this path and then to start doing some planting. Okay, so it is a few days later and I am back out here working on the front yard. Since I stopped the last video, I went and picked up some more pavers, finished the path out into the middle of the yard, And you may be able to see behind me, I dumped a bunch of compost onto the yard. So just like I did with the path, I took over a bunch of wheelbarrows full of compost and just dumped it roughly evenly all over the grass, and used a rake to rake it out to get it about as even as I could. And I did dump it a little bit heavier than I did under the path, since this is all soil that I want to improve down the line and that I'm planning on planting in. So let's take a look. Here is how it looks. So it's already looking really cleaned up since I covered up a lot of the grass. Another thing I did was I dug out all of the sod along the sidewalk here so I could sprinkle some zinnia seeds. I do plan on putting some lavender bushes there, but I'm working on propagating those myself this summer, so I will probably plant them in the fall. And then I've put a couple of things that I already had in, like this creeping phlox that will get really big, a really big circle here, and fill it in nicely. And then some sedum propagations I had, some more creeping phlox, and then just a couple other annuals to fill out the space here. This is another, this is a hibiscus plant that is a tropical hibiscus, so it is annual where we live. But it produces edible calyxes after it flowers that I really love. I buy them to dry out and make tea, so I figured why not try and grow it myself. And while a lot of the perennials here are filling out, I figured I'd put in some annuals that get really big and have some nice color so it doesn't look too boring the first year. Now, to decide where you're going to put your plants, you can do what I had wanted to do, which is come up with a plan, sketch it out, place things based on their size and their sun and all that stuff, and save yourself a lot of aimless walking around in the front yard for your neighbors to see. But that's not what I'm doing. It is what I had intended to do, but it's not what I'm doing. Instead, I am focusing on planting around the bigger things that I know are going to be here for a while. So for example, this is a hazelnut tree, which has more of like a 6 to 8 foot tall, 6 to 8 foot wide, bushy growthing pattern. And then over there, I have a hardy almond tree, which gets pretty tall, but can stay pretty thin and not provide like a ton of shade if you prune it the right way. And then up in the corner, I have an elderberry bush. It's still pretty young. So other than that, I'm choosing everything and where it's going. So the strategy that I am taking is to find spots for the taller perennials first. So I have a teeny tiny little New York ironweed down in the ground here, actually still in its pot because it was a winter sown ironweed, and it's still very, very small. So I don't want it to get lost in the soil. So I just set its pot down into the ground so I can mark its spot, and then I will transplant it probably in a week or two. I have some creeping phlox up here by the sidewalk, and then I've got some other random things already just placed around. I have an orange butterfly weed here, and then I mentioned that I've got this large annual hibiscus bush here. Other than that, now it is time for me to just kind of walk around and figure out where I'm going to put my bigger things. So I just dropped a taller version of bee balm back there. And right now I have a more petite version of bee balm. This is not the straight species. This is a shorter, more dwarf cultivar. So I think that is maybe the last taller thing that I have to plant today. So what I'm going to do is just kind of find a nice spot where I think it'll be a good anchor plant. And you know, since I planted the other bee balm over there, I think I'm going to choose this side of the yard for this bee balm. And you know, I think I'm gonna go right behind this orange butterfly bush, because the orange butterfly bush, it's a kind of milkweed, and it stays quite small. It's much smaller than the swamp milkweed with pink or white flowers that you may be familiar with. So it only gets about like maybe this tall and that wide, at least its first or second year. It could spread or get bigger. So what I'm going to do is put my smaller bee balm like right here by the path, because I know that I am growing zinnias there this year, but this fall, if I remember and get around to it, I have a bunch of perennial lavender propagations that I'd really like to line the sidewalk with. So all I'm going to do is just dig down into that dirt that I have already covered with compost. And I have a bucket of this compost that I've been carrying around with me just to lightly amend the soil for anything that I am planting. So a lot of these plants that I'm planting in here are native and they're perennials, which means they will do just fine in our native soil. But it won't hurt to give them a jump start to add in some nice, rich organic matter. And this is composted manure, so that will definitely do the trick. So I'm just gonna throw a couple handfuls in here, and this is the same process I'm doing for all of the plants, and roughly mix it with about 50% native soil, 50% compost. And then I'm gonna take my plant, pop it out, put it in the ground, and backfill it. And then I try to dig out about a couple inches around where I'm planting, so that when I start to mulch and I'm looking for spots of this weedy, grassy turf that is still left, I can make sure I'm using cardboard or something else to further smother out that grass. So I'm just gonna pack this down a little bit. And then when I'm done planting everything, I will water. So I'm not gonna water now, though you definitely do want to water right after you plant it, especially on a sunny day like today. So now I'm just gonna repeat that process with a couple of the other perennials I have here. I have a couple yarrow plants that I am going to pop in the ground today. Hi, baby girl. And then a couple dahlias. Those are my annuals that I love that I'm using to fill out, but honestly, they're technically annuals, but they are now perennials here where we are in zone 7A in Maryland. They come back year after year. If you have a dahlia that you really, really like, I would recommend probably digging it up and saving it indoors. But the popular idea that dahlias do not winter over here as perennials in zone 7A is, unfortunately, because of global climate change, a dated one now. So I'm gonna take this yarrow out of its pot, show you guys. This was a propagation from one of my yarrows in the back. In fact, a lot of the plants I'm planting up here are propagations from plants in the back, either from dividing or cuttings or whatever. And this one, I actually don't know if this is a pink or a yellow. And I was gonna split this one and pot it separately around, but I actually think I'm gonna keep this one like it is and pot it just to give it a little bit more of a jump start with growth. And I have found that yarrow, it's more bushy. It'll fill in an area really nicely. So I think I'm gonna pop this yarrow, I'm gonna do it right in front of this butterfly bush here. It's got absolutely gorgeous umbel-like flowers, and it blooms pretty prolifically all season, and it's a real magnet for pollinators. I have it planted all around my raised beds. Not all around my raised beds, but I have a lot of it planted around my raised beds in the backyard just because it attracts so many beneficial insects that I want to be putting to work for me in the garden. It grows super well in poor soils, and it's very drought tolerant. After I finish putting in all of my bigger plants, so the trees, shrubs, any perennials that get really large, or even any larger annuals like the large tropical hibiscus bushes I'm growing this year, after I do all of that, it's time to start filling in around them. So I like to use a lot of ground covers, especially creeping phlox, which is a native plant where I am here in Maryland, zone 7A. Creeping phlox doesn't do much its first year, but it spreads out sometimes to up to like 2 feet wide. It's a very lush green look, and it blooms super duper early in the season, which makes it a super great early pollinator too. So I'm doing a lot of creeping phlox. I'm also doing a lot of perennial thyme and oregano because they look really lovely most of the year, and you can also use them for cooking, and they smell great. Now, other than that, I'm filling in with a bunch of annuals this first year because I know it's going to take a little while for the perennials to take off. So I'm putting in a lot of marigolds and a lot of petunias because I know that they are going to just take over a lot of surface area on the ground to help me prevent some of those weeds. So I'll show you guys what that looks like in this area so far. I'm pretty much done planting here, and then we'll move on to some sheet mulching. So up front here is the area that I have not mulched yet. The back I have done most of the mulching so far. I have to be really careful walking in here because I have some pretty tiny plants. But I have quite a few different larger plants in here, and then I've added in some things like catmint, which doesn't do much its first year, but will get quite large in future years. And then this is an example of a creeping phlox that I just put in the ground. And then I have some English thyme here, which is the perennial kind where we are. And then back here, I just really have a mix of different cone flowers, and I even put in a few dahlias because I love cut dahlia flowers. Here is an example of a marigold I put in. This was a very sad clearance rack marigold. And then another little small creeping phlox back here. Now, if you remember, this whole space was turf grass before. So I did start smothering out the grass by smothering down a bunch of the manure I dumped on it and spread out. However, there is some more work I'm going to be doing killing off this grass this year, and that is called sheet mulching. So I am taking black and white newspapers and old cardboard and paper bags and stuff like that and laying them down pretty meticulously over the grass and super weedy areas, and then I am mulching on top of that. And that is a very, very effective way of killing off the turf grass without having to dig it up and disturb the soil. So I will show you guys the last little bit I'm hoping to finish tonight of sheet mulching in this area. I will show you guys exactly how that works, and I actually have a whole video about sheet mulching when we killed off a big patch of grass in the backyard to put in a berry patch if you're interested in some more ramblings about sheet mulching, but this will just be a little overview. So when I'm sheet mulching, I generally like to try and avoid things with too much colored ink on them, though as you can see, these Walmart bags that I am using do have some coloring on them. It's not the end of the world. Honestly, there are worse things probably poisoning me every day than some colored ink decomposing in my soil. But I know people have some very particular opinions about things like that. So if it's not for you, it's not for you, totally fine. Stick with newspaper that doesn't have any colored ink on it. The one thing I will say is that I do not use any glossy things. So any cardboard that has a protective coating on top of it. So a lot of times you'll see advertisements have like a glossy colored design, and it has like a kind of like a waxy coat on top of the paper, the newspaper. I do not use those because I am just concerned about them breaking down over time. And the whole reason I like to use cardboard or paper over landscaping fabric is that cardboard and paper breaks down over time, and that's what I want. I want it to last long enough to smother out the grass, but not last forever. And when I'm doing this, I do like to overlap slightly. So if I have one piece ending right here, I will try and overlap it just a little. I'm not going all the way up to the edge here because I did drop a bunch of zinnia seeds in here that I'm waiting for them to sprout so I can thin them out. And then I will sheet mulch over that area so I don't sheet mulch over all of my little zinnia seed babies. So I'm just going right up to the edge of where I have these things planted. And then it's not super windy today, but a lot of times I'll just take a little bit of dirt and chuck it on top of these to get them to stay in place while I'm working. Now, a lot of times I will think that I have enough cardboard and paper bags, but as you can see, they don't last very long once you actually start laying them down. So I like to tear the bags apart so I'm not laying down a double layer of paper, if that makes sense. Now, if you have something that you're really trying to smother out that's going to be a toughie to smother out, you can double up your cardboard or leave your paper bags double without taking them apart. Just keep in mind that that will take a little bit longer to naturally break down in your soil, which is generally not a huge issue. A lot of times I will factor in at least one whole growing season of weather and snow and rain and whatnot for things to break down. But oftentimes it takes a little bit longer than that. Like sometimes I'll be planting in the back in areas where I have used a paper bag or cardboard grass smothering method, and I will hit some cardboard or some paper, and then I just slice right through it with my shovel and move along. So it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't have a harmful effect on anything if it stays on the ground under your mulch for longer than you'd like it to. It does not prevent water from getting to your plants or anything like that. It's just something to be aware of if you're digging down to plant in that area after you've sheet mulched. And I said I was done planting, but I am always lying when I say I'm done planting, because I just popped in this little guy right here, hens and chicks. Thought this would be really cute in this corner here because it'll kind of grow into this nook and hopefully choke out any of the weeds that will pop up here. So we are just about done this whole area. We have probably about 2 wheelbarrows worth of mulch left, and then we'll call it a night. Okay, since that last clip wrapped up, I put the camera away for a couple of weeks and just let the front yard grow a little bit. So it's been about like 2.5 weeks since I finished up the other side and got all of my plants in, and now I'm going to show you guys what the finished product looks like. Okay, here we go. This is the first side that I did and planted. So the plants over here are a little bit more mature than the other side, but everything is filling out really, really nicely. And I did do a lot more annuals than I thought I would be doing, but that's just for this year. My long-term goal is to have this be majority perennials, mostly native, things like that. I did put in a lot of these wave petunias this year just to add some color, and they are already filling out really, really nicely. I've got lots of marigolds in here. And then one thing that I'm pretty excited about is I put all of my extra vegetable starts up here around the border of the wall this year. So I've got eggplants, and surprisingly, this is actually my tomato plant that is doing the best out of all of my tomato plants that I just randomly threw up in here and then I pretty much am ignoring. I've got pepper plants, different types of eggplants, all up and down the border of this garden. So I am really, really hoping that this fills out nicely this year, and I will do an update video on how things are looking as they start to grow, especially some of these sunflowers that are going to get really, really big. And this whole path here is going to be lined with zinnias, and then hopefully this obelisk trellis that I have is going to be covered in scarlet runner beans pretty soon. So I am really looking forward to doing an update video. I'm really, really happy with how this has turned out, and I can't wait to show you guys what it looks like as it really starts to get growing. Until then, happy planting!